How to free yourself from guilt without abandoning your parents. The deepest guilt is not that which arises from our mistakes, but that which springs from the simple act of existing differently from those who brought us into the world. How is it possible to love and honor those who gave us life without betraying our own nature? This question echoes in the quietest corridors of the human soul, where ancestral voices dwell that whisper to us what we should be, while our essence cries out for freedom. It is in this dark and sacred territory that humanity's oldest drama unfolds, the conflict between filial loyalty and personal authenticity. Carl Jung, the courageous explorer of the abysses of the human psyche, dedicated his life to understanding the labyrinths of the soul. Born in a time of profound transformation, when the 19th century was giving way to the 20th, Jung realized that modernity had brought with it not only technological advances, but also an unprecedented existential crisis. Religious certainties were dissolving, social structures were fragmenting, and the individual was faced with a terrifying freedom, that of defining his own destiny. Jung understood that this freedom came with a cruel price, the guilt of straying from the paths traced by his ancestors. And it was by delving into the depths of the unconscious that he discovered that this guilt was not only personal, but collective, archetypal, a wound that runs through generations like an underground river of pain. On an autumn afternoon, when the golden leaves danced in the wind like memories that refused to die, a woman walked through the streets of her hometown. Every corner carried the weight of a story. Every house held echoes of a childhood that seemed to belong to someone else. She had left years before, seeking to build a life that made sense to her soul, not to family expectations. But now, back, for her mother's funeral, she felt like a stranger in her own origins. The unspoken words hung in the air like ghosts, the silent disappointments, the unfulfilled dreams, the choices that were never understood. How to explain to a mother who dreamed of grandchildren the call to a contemplative life? How to justify to a working-class father the need to create art instead of ensuring financial stability? How to translate to simple hearts the complexity of a soul that needed to fly in order not to die? Jung would call this a conflict between persona and self. The persona is the mask we wear to conform to social expectations, the face we show the world in order to be accepted and loved. For this woman, the perfect filial persona would be to marry young, have children, live close to her parents, follow the safe and familiar steps. But the self, the totality of her being, asked for something else: authenticity, creation, discovery of her own path. Guilt arises precisely at this point of tension. It is not a rational guilt, based on concrete acts of malevolence, but an ontological, existential guilt, which arises from the simple fact of being who we are. It is the guilt of disappointing those who love us by not being who they need us to be. It is the guilt of choosing our happiness when it means causing pain to those who have given us everything they could give. This ancestral guilt has deep roots in what Jung called the collective unconscious. It is not just our personal history, but archetypal patterns that repeat themselves across generations. The archetype of the obedient son, the devoted daughter, the descendant who honors the ancestors by repeating their ways. These patterns live within us like powerful inner voices, whispering that our difference is a betrayal, that our individuality is a form of abandonment. But Jung discovered something revolutionary. True honor to parents comes not from imitation, but from the full realization of our human potential. Parents, at their deepest core, want their children to be happy and fulfilled. When we choose authenticity over conformity, when we prefer inner truth to external expectations, we are, paradoxically, fulfilling the deepest desire of those who love us. The woman standing before her mother's coffin began to understand this when she found an old diary among her mother's belongings. In its yellowed pages, she discovered the secret dreams of a young woman who once wanted to be a painter, but had abandoned her paintbrushes to care for her family. The mother, who had always criticized her artistic choices, had herself sacrificed art for responsibility. The daughter, who felt guilty about following her dreams, was, in fact, the fulfillment of her mother's unlived dreams. Jung would call this synchronicity, those magical moments when the universe conspires to show us truths that our rational mind cannot grasp. The diary did not appear by chance at that moment of pain and questioning. It was as if the psyche itself was orchestrating a revelation, an encounter with the truth that liberates. The shadow of filial guilt carries within itself a hidden light. Jung taught us that the shadow is not only the repository of our denied aspects, but also the treasure of our unrealized potentials. The guilt of not being the perfect son or daughter hides in its dark folds the key to our individuation. It is precisely because we feel guilty that we know we are moving towards our truth. The process of liberation from filial guilt does not involve rejecting our parents or denying the importance of family ties. It involves the profound understanding that true love does not demand uniformity, but celebrates difference. It involves the perception that honoring our parents means bearing fruit with the sap they gave us, even if these fruits are different from what they imagined. Imagine a garden where all the plants try to be roses because the gardener loves roses. The result would be not only artificial, but also impoverishing. The beauty of a garden lies precisely in the diversity of its flowers, each one fully expressing its unique nature. Truly wise parents are like gardeners who provide good soil, water and light, but allow each plant to express its essence. The woman returned to her home in another city with a lighter heart, carrying with her not only the pain of loss, but also the certainty of a new understanding. She had not abandoned her mother by choosing a different path. She had, rather, carried forward the creative impulse that her mother could not fulfill. It was as if, through her art, her mother could finally paint the pictures she never painted. Jung shows us that individuation is a painful but necessary process. It is the movement of the psyche toward wholeness, toward the integration of all aspects of our personality, including those that seem to contradict family expectations. It is a process that does not deny our past, but transforms it into fuel for our future. Filial guilt, when understood in its archetypal dimension, reveals itself as a disguised call. It is the self-demanding recognition. It is the soul asking for permission to be itself. The pain we feel when we disappoint our parents is real and should be honored, but it should not paralyze us. It is a sacred pain, marking our passage from childish dependence to adult responsibility for being who we truly are. The path to liberation is neither linear nor simple. There are times when guilt returns like a high tide, flooding our consciousness with doubts and regrets. There are days when we question whether it was worth choosing authenticity over approval. These moments are part of the process. Jung taught us that the psyche does not evolve in a straight line, but in spirals, revisiting the same themes at ever deeper levels of understanding. Emotional maturity allows us to carry the tension between filial love and personal authenticity, without having to resolve that tension by denying either pole. We can love our parents deeply, and at the same time, choose paths that they do not understand. We can honor their memory by living fully and authentically, even if it means living differently than they chose. This is one of Jung's most beautiful discoveries, that psychological maturity does not eliminate the contradictions of human existence, but teaches us to inhabit them with grace. We do not need to resolve the paradox of loving and disagreeing simultaneously. We need only learn to live within this paradox with integrity and compassion. The woman who returned from the funeral now carried a new understanding of her family heritage. She had not only inherited genes and traumas, fears and limitations, she had also inherited a life force, a creative impulse, a capacity to love that transcended the need for approval. The greatest gift her mother had given her was not expectations about how she should live, but life itself, with all its unexplored potential. Jung realized that the drama between parents and children is at its core a cosmic drama about continuity and transformation. Previous generations represent tradition, stability, time-tested values. New generations represent innovation, adaptation, evolution. The conflict between them is not an accident, but an evolutionary necessity. It is through this conflict that humanity grows and develops. When we understand our filial guilt in this broader perspective, it transforms. It ceases to be a burden that paralyzes us and becomes a force that propels us. The pain of disappointing our parents reveals itself as the pains of growing up, like the contractions that precede a birth. We are being born into ourselves, and every birth involves separation and pain. The forgiveness we need is not necessarily the forgiveness of our parents, although that is welcome when it is possible. Forgiveness, what we need most is self-forgiveness, forgiving ourselves for being different, for following paths that cause concern to those who love us, for prioritizing our inner truth over superficial family harmony. This self-forgiveness is not self-indulgence. It is an act of courage and responsibility. It is taking responsibility for our own lives, our own happiness, our own contribution to the world. It is recognizing that we have not only the right, but the duty to be fully who we are. Freedom from filial guilt is fundamentally an act of love. Love for ourselves, love for our parents understood in their complex humanity, love for the life we have been given and which we must live with integrity. It is a love that embraces difference, that celebrates diversity, that understands that each person has their own inner music to play. Jung reminds us that individuation is not a selfish process, but an altruistic one. When we become fully who we are, we offer the world something unique and necessary. Our authenticity is not just a gift to ourselves, but a contribution to the rich tapestry of human experience. Our parents, even if they do not fully understand, our choices benefit from our fulfillment. Their seed has grown into a tree that bears unique fruit, and this is a source of pride, not disappointment. The woman planted a tree in her garden in memory of her mother. Not a tree like the ones that grew in her kindergarten, but a new exotic species that would flourish uniquely in that soil. It was her way of saying that love does not demand repetition, but celebrates creation. It was her way of honoring her mother, not through imitation, but through the full realization of the potentials she had inherited. The seasons passed, and the tree grew strong and beautiful, different from all the others in the garden, but perfectly integrated into the whole. Its fruit was unique. Its flowers had a color never before seen in that place, and the woman understood that this was the perfect metaphor for her own life, growing in the soil that her parents prepared, but blossoming with her own identity, bearing fruit that only she could bear. The guilt that had once been a burden became a silent teacher, always reminding her of the importance of connection, but never stopping her from flying. She had learned to dance in the tension between belonging and freedom, between loyalty and authenticity, between love and individuation. And in the silence of the nights, when the wind swayed the branches of the memory tree, she could hear not the lament of a wayward daughter, but the song of a life fully lived, a melody that honored the past while embracing the future, a harmony that can only exist when we finally understand that to love is not to limit, but to free.